So our investors keep asking us, where is your next acquisition and what are you looking for? So look, one of our core principles here is transparency. So I'll try and be as transparent as I can. The easiest way to explain this is that we are going towards primary. So there's a divergence in the market that's happening now, and it tends to happen whenever there's uncertainty, in that primary assets in primary locations in tried and tested positions tend to create greater demand. There tends to be a greater demand for those assets as opposed to secondary assets. So secondary assets may be like regional locations or assets without a full lease profile or assets that are a little bit further out of town. So that's at a very high level. That's at a macro level. That's what we're looking for. We want to tend towards primary assets. So there's a couple of things which we can immediately exclude. The first one is that we don't want strata. Strata by its very nature means that we are prohibited from controlling the destiny of that asset in our own hands. We're beholden to the other strata members to get agreement and approval. So, when we're looking at managing investors' money and being able to dictate how we manage that and how we can bring our nous to the property and how we can manage their investment by value and by yield, we need to be able to manage all aspects of it. So we're really moving away from strata property right now. What else are we looking for? Well, we're looking for core assets. So core assets are assets with, in our opinion, large underpinnings of land value. So really large asset size in terms of lands. We're wanting assets that have a big land component. And when you look at the value of the property, we're looking for properties where a huge part of that value is actually tied up in the land, because historically that's what appreciates over time, whereas the buildings themselves actually depreciate. So that's another element of what we're looking for. And then you start looking at, okay, well, what are the locations where we want to acquire these properties? And the locations is something we come back to again and again and again. And there's a fantastic saying in property, location, location, location. And it is an important one. What we are really focusing in on location is, why is that location relevant to that population in that city or that town as a result of the behavior of those people? That's what we want to answer. And if we can answer that question, then we know that we're taking some risk away from the tenant, and we're actually making sure that the asset itself can continue to thrive in a post-coronavirus world. What does that mean? It means that if we lose our tenant, there's still a demand for that asset. There's still a demand for that location. There's still a demand for that functional site. There's still a demand for that corner site with an entry and an exit point to make it easier for the user. So those are just some fundamentals that we come back to. And as we work our way down the list, the last thing we get to is tenant. And what are the tenants that we want to support? What are the industries we want to support? It's a really fantastic question, because tenants, by their nature, are actually our biggest partner in property. They're the ones that pay all the rent. That rent pays the mortgage. That rent pays our return. That rent pays the costs. That rent pays all the repairs and maintenance. So they're an absolutely enormous stakeholder in each and every one of our property syndications, in each and every one of the properties we own. So the first thing is, we've got to lean into these tenants and we've got to help them through this time. There is no point having an amazing property vacant. There is no point in that. We want to understand the difficulties our tenants are going through. And as a property manager, as an asset manager, we want to understand it and respond to it swiftly and quickly so the tenants know that we're on their side. We want to get them through this difficulty. There has to be a win-win, but we want to really understand it, spend the time with our tenants, have the conversations that are difficult, and come out the back end of this with a leased asset rather than a vacant one. So what are the tenants that we're now looking to acquire? What are the assets we're looking to acquire, and what are the tenants which are underpinning those assets? And it comes down to a few things. One of them being, look, we're really loving essential services right now. It's not a mystery. There's been some uncertainty in the coronavirus world, and now we want to remove as much uncertainty as we can by making sure that we are backing the right tenants. So a good one being essential services. So what is that? Logistics, maybe government services like Centrelinks and government departments, childcare, medical is a great one. And then we want to really lean into those areas and understand what makes that asset relevant to that particular tenant. And that's the question we need to continue asking ourselves. But I might just touch on it really quickly because I can, in that we are kind of trying to move away from the macro picture where we can. And once we've understood the macro movements, then we want to get into the minutia. So a really good example is, holistically, we're staying away from retail right now because we've got enough in our portfolio, and there's no doubt that it's an industry which is being a little bit damaged. It's experiencing some pain. But there are tenants within the retail landscape which are knocking the lights out. So if we were to go buy a Bunnings warehouse later on this year, that is a complete antithesis of, we don't like retail. But what we've done there is we've actually gone into the minutia of that industry and found a tenant that has delivered amazing results during the middle of the coronavirus and really has been a tried and tested payer of rent, and has had an increase in turnover. So it's important that we don't get swept away with the macro, and that we still dive into the micro and the minutia, which actually make up our decisions and inform us to what assets we're wanting, what assets we want to acquire, and then how we want to leverage. And that's probably the third part that I'll touch on in another series about how we leverage our assets and how we're looking to deliver yield even in times of uncertainty.